The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the livestock auction yard, turning the dirt to dust and the bleachers into ovens. Thomas Brennan stood with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with the practiced eye of a man who'd been ranching for 40 years. He'd come looking for breeding stock, maybe a young mare or two, but what he was witnessing made his stomach turn. They'd brought her out in a reinforced trailer, and the murmuring in the crowd had started immediately. Black Widow, they called her. A magnificent black thoroughbred mare with a coat like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with barely contained rage. She'd killed her previous owner, they said, trampled a man to death in Kentucky, then passed through 6 owners in 2 years, each one trying to break her spirit, each one failing. She'd injured handlers, destroyed property, and earned a reputation as the most dangerous horse in 3 states. The auctioneer's voice was almost apologetic as he started the bidding. Now folks, full disclosure on this one. This mare's got a history. She's sound in body but mean in spirit. Starting bid, we'll say $100. Silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Thomas watched as 2 men tried to get the mare into the auction ring. She reared, her hoofs flashing dangerously close to their heads. They managed to get her in, but she stood trembling with fury, her ears pinned back, her whole body radiating violence and fear masquerading as aggression. $50 then, the auctioneer continued, his tone growing more desperate. Surely someone wants to take a chance on her. More silence. Thomas studied the horse carefully. He saw what everyone else saw, the danger, the wildness, the unpredictability, but he also saw something else, the way she favored her left hind leg ever so slightly, the old scars on her flanks, the absolute terror hiding beneath the rage. This wasn't a killer. This was a creature that had been broken by cruelty and was fighting for her life the only way she knew how. $5, Thomas called out, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable quiet. The crowd turned to stare at him. A few people laughed. Old Tom Brennan, buying himself a death sentence for the price of a burger. The auctioneer looked relieved just to be done with it. Sold to Mr. Brennan for $5. You'll need to sign a waiver. Thomas signed without reading it. He'd buried his wife 3 years ago, watched cancer take the only woman he'd ever loved despite every prayer and every treatment. His children lived in distant cities with families of their own, visiting once a year out of obligation. The ranch felt empty now, just him and memories and the daily routine of survival. If this horse killed him, well, at least it would be quick. Getting her home was a nightmare. It took 4 men and 2 hours to load her into his trailer. Thomas drove carefully, listening to her kick and scream behind him. When he finally got her to his ranch, he didn't try to stable her. Instead, he turned her loose in his largest pasture, 20 acres of grass and a creek in freedom. For 3 days, he didn't approach her. He just sat on his porch in the evenings, watching her run the fence line, watching her slowly begin to graze, watching the tension in her body start to ease. On the 4th day, he walked out to the middle of the pasture and sat down in the grass with a book, staying there for hours, not looking at her, not approaching, just being present. She watched him from a distance, snorting and stamping, but she didn't charge, didn't attack. Just watched this strange old man who'd bought her for nothing and asked nothing in return. Days turned into weeks. Thomas established a routine. Every morning he'd bring grain and leave it far from her, then sit and read while she ate. Every evening he'd check her water trough and talk to her in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. About the weather, about his late wife Mary and how she used to make apple pie, about his daughter's new baby he'd seen only in photographs. Slowly, impossibly, the distance between them shrank. One morning, Thomas found her standing near the fence where he usually entered. Another day she didn't move away when he approached the grain bucket. Then came the morning when he felt her breath on his neck as he poured the feed, warm and curious. "Hey there, girl," he whispered, not turning around. "Took you long enough to trust me." Winter came, brutal and cold. Thomas built her a shelter, but she rarely used it, preferring to stand in the snow, testing her newfound freedom. He worried about her, checked on her multiple times a day. His daughter called and told him he was crazy, spending time on a dangerous animal instead of coming to visit his grandchildren. Thomas couldn't explain why this mattered so much. How this broken creature and his broken heart somehow understood each other. It was a February morning when everything changed. Thomas had gone out to feed her, his boots crunching in fresh snow, when he felt the pain explode in his chest. Heart attack. He dropped to his knees, the grain bucket spilling, his vision going dark at the edges. He was going to die out here, alone in the snow, just like he'd half expected. But then she was there. Black Widow, the killer horse, the monster everyone had warned him about. She stood over him, her body blocking the wind, her warmth radiating down. She stayed there, standing guard, as Thomas fumbled for his phone and called for help. She stayed there as the ambulance arrived, only moving aside when the paramedics approached, and she was there when Thomas came home from the hospital 3 days later, waiting at the fence, nickering softly when she saw him. The doctor said if he'd been exposed to that wind and cold for much longer, he wouldn't have made it. The horse had saved his life. Thomas walked out to the pasture that evening, moving slowly, his chest still sore. Black Widow met him halfway. For the first time, he reached out and touched her face, running his weathered hand down her soft nose. She leaned into his touch. This creature everyone had called a monster, and made a sound he'd never heard from her before, something almost like a purr. "You're no Black Widow," he whispered. "You're a survivor, just like me." He renamed her Mercy. She never let anyone else near her, never trusted another soul. But Thomas could lead her with a word, ride her with nothing but a halter, sleep against her in the pasture on warm afternoons. She followed him like a shadow, his $5 miracle, the creature that had reminded him that broken things can heal if someone is patient enough to let them. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the thing everyone else is afraid of is exactly what you need. And sometimes, for the price of $5 and a whole lot of patience, you can save 2 lives at once.